Okay, so good afternoon, friends, and welcome to our sermon, as it were. This sermon was preached Sunday a week ago, but due to circumstances we could not load it. Load shedding and other stuff happening. So we're recording it today, and then it will be made available tomorrow, I think, first thing. We are currently in our sermon series towards the summer of holiness, and we are dealing with various topics or things which may challenge us, stopping us from moving from winter to summer. Winter being a place where we feel stuck, where we struggle to perhaps find life, to find a way forward, and there are some things that can keep us there, and so we need to engage with these issues and find a way through them so that we can come to summer where there is life again, and life is good. And so today we're going to look at fear. Now, I remember seeing someone wearing a T-shirt with the words or the word fearless on the front. And I've often wondered about that. Is it possible to live a life totally, absolutely free from fear? I don't think so. I think all people experience fear from time to time. There may be different things we may fear, but all people experience fear from time to time. And some fears are actually good. To fear something does not mean that we're wrong or in a bad place necessarily. But we'll see what this is about as we go along. Now, one of the Psalms speaking about fear is Psalm 27. And in this Psalm, you will hear the psalmist expressing his fear or his desire to not be fearful, to not be afraid of whatever, and how he find in God's presence, expressing his fear, and yet at the same time finding in God's presence a way to deal with his fear. We want to deal with our fears in a way that they do not overwhelm us, that they do not take away from us our desire to live life more fully. And so here it is then, Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppression, of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes. For false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Thanks be to God for God's word. You know, the Psalms express something of the experiences of God's people. And there are more than one psalm in which God's people expresses their experience of fear or their fears. But at the same time, they know where to turn to in order to deal with their fears. And so in this particular psalm, I think there are one or two things that kind of stand out, certainly for me, that may, as it did for the psalmist, may help us to deal with our fears. But let me also say, before I carry on, that throughout this sermon series, I've made it clear that, you know, we don't have all the answers. And often when you explore some of these issues we may be experiencing in our everyday lives, for some people they are a bit more serious than for others. So some people may benefit from a sermon like this as a guideline perhaps. Some may actually need to see someone else, perhaps a professional person, to speak about some deep-seated fears that they have, that they are struggling to overcome. You will know best where you are in your particular journey with God, and when you speak about your fears, and how do you take that to God so that you can come to a place where you say, I will not fear. I will not fear. But it is a journey. It is a process to get to that place. For fear is very real, and we do experience fear from time to time, and we have reason to fear. We sometimes have very good reason to be very afraid, and so we must not take this lightly, but see what we can do about our fears. So here are two things, I think, in that psalm that may help us as we turn to God to deal with our fears. And based on those two things, you can hear the psalmist, the author, how he grows in his confidence that he is able to overcome his fear, to not fear anymore, because of who God is for him. Now, I don't know what his fears were about. On the one hand, when you read the psalm, it sounds as though it may have been political, it may have been military, it may have been social, there may have been other stuff there. It's almost as if he's on the running away from his enemies, or someone's pursuing him. And so he deals with that kind of fear. Now, our fears may be different, but I think there are some things when we start talking about our fears which may be the same. Certainly in the way in which we may deal with our fears. And so here it is. The first thing the psalmist discovers, I think, is that he is accepted. That even though he expresses his fearlessness, his desire to be without fear, he is accepted. And it reminds me of someone who once wrote, "Accept that you are accepted." And I think the important thing about that is that it means that you are not alone. You know, when you're not alone, somehow it is easier to face your fears. It is like a child asking his parent to leave on the light at night before the parent who disappear through the door to his or her own room. And that light is like a symbol almost of the parent's presence. And it offers some kind of help so that the child is able to let go of the fear and able to sleep alone in his or her room. It dispels, it takes away the darkness. And the same with when the child asks the parent to leave the door a little bit open. Even though the door is open, even though the parents are next door, in the room next door, the parents are simply just a whisper, a call away. And I think that is what helps us through our fear. So the psalmist discovers that even in his time of trouble, when he needs to let go of his fear, it seems to overwhelm him. That's why he's calling out for God. That's why he's expressing a deep desire. I am not fear, I am not afraid. But it expresses something of what's going on inside of him. And he knows, he discovers that God is but in the next room. God is available. God is visible. God is just there for him. And that is because God accepts him in his situation. Whatever it may have been. God accepts him and he's calling out to God in the midst of his fears or his belief that he has now overcome his fear. Friends, to accept that we are accepted means that we accept that we are loved. And that is what it is about. When we know we are deeply loved, then we can deal with our fears. And the same with God. The moment we can accept that we are deeply loved by God, somehow that togetherness, that companionship, that love, make it possible for us to let go, sometimes perhaps only a little bit, of our fears. The second thing he discovers is that God guides him. In and through his situation, God continues to guide him. I once went to a building site, and darkness overcame us, so we were there, and we tried to find the front door, but as you go along, you would stumble over stuff. If ever you've been on a building site, you would know what I'm talking about. It's not a safe place. And then there came a moment when someone on the inside switched on the outside lights. And suddenly we could see. And we could find our way amongst the rubble. And I think that's how it is with God's guidance. We find ourselves often in a world filled with rubble. It's like a building site. There's lots of stuff lying around. And we can so easily trip and fall. And then God switches on the light. God is the light in which we find our way through it all. And if we know that God is our guide, that even when we are afraid, the light that is God will shine and help us to find our way through what is real, what is not real, what is good, what is not good. And we find God's guiding light. It's not that difficult. Reading our Bibles, praying, having a a deeper prayer life in communion with other believers. And so there are many ways in which we may find God guiding us. Apologies for that. So that we may not lose our way and we do not have to fear of losing our way. And so because of these two things, I think the psalmist, having discovered that he is accepted by God, that God still guides him, he is growing in confidence. He knows that he needs to be afraid. But at the same time, having discovered who God is, he knows that he can actually say, I will not be afraid. I will not be afraid. And so I was just wondering that if we should embrace that or discover that we too may come to a place where we say we will not fear. And how will we not fear? There are some guidelines people tell us that may help us to not fear or to fear less. Let me rather put it that way. The first thing we can do is to not make things bigger than they are. I think it's one of the big reasons why we are often overwhelmed with fear, is that so often we can make things bigger than they are. Now, I know there are some things that are big, and we can't make them smaller than what they are. But perhaps standing, taking a step back, seeing things for what they really are, and not make them bigger than what they are, may help us to deal with our fears. Another thing we can do is to see opportunities rather than threats. So often everything becomes like a threat, deeply challenging us. There's actually a lot of stuff that offers us opportunity for growth, for engagement, for imagination, and so much more. So let's make sure that we know when threats are real and when they can offer us opportunities, and see them as opportunities rather than threats. And the last thing I want to say is that what is the worst that can happen? I think so often in our lives, we tend to think that the worst is really the worst when it is actually not. Yes, sometimes the worst can happen. But once again, maybe there are times when we can step back, just a step or two back, and say, what is the worst that can happen here? And then be realistic about our expectations. And so often we will find that the worst is really not the worst after all. And so these three things, I think, can help us to deal with our fears. But they come from a place which we know that we are accepted by God, we are deeply loved by God, and that God continues to guide us. When we are grounded in those things, then, friends, it's no need to wear a t-shirt that says, we are fearless in an absolute sense. It doesn't matter what come my way, I will remain fearless. I think that's a little bit out of touch with reality. But what is reality, what is real, is that we can say we will not fear because we are accepted and because God is our ultimate guide. God is the light which shines upon our journeys and make it possible for us to not fear, to place our fears, as it were, in God's bosom, in God's hands, in God's heart, so that we may have peace. Friends, we continue with our sermon series. Last Sunday we looked at temptation, and we will continue this coming Sunday. So once again, apologies for the late recording and making available of this Sunday sermon, but know that it's not done lightly. There are reasons, but thank you for your patience and for having watched this sermon. God bless and take care.